is 1969. The world is spinning to the sound of two bands. One is the Beatles, the undisputed kings of rock and roll, the cultural phenomenon that changed everything. Their clean-cut image and evolving sound, from melodic pop to psychedelic masterpieces, were a global obsession. They were the benchmark, the gold standard. The other is the Rolling Stones, the bad boys, the rebels, the raw, electric force of nature. With their swagger, their blues-infused grit, and a counterculture attitude, they were the true embodiment of rock and roll's rebellious spirit. This was music as a dangerous, visceral force. But as the decade closes, a third group is rising. Three brothers from Australia, with harmonies so perfect, songs so sweet, they are soaring up the charts, track after track. This is the Bee Gees. The world sees them as innocent, talented, and on a collision course with destiny. But behind the scenes, a secret war is raging. A bitter, brutal battle for identity, for legitimacy, and for the very soul of music. The war isn't just between them and the critics. It's a war with the very men who ruled the world of rock. And at the heart of it all is a brutal, whispered accusation. A label so damning it could have ended their careers before they even began. A question that has echoed through the decades. Did Mick Jagger, the legendary frontman of the Rolling Stones, truly believe the Bee Gees were a fake Beatles? And did the Bee Gees themselves harbor a secret fear that he was right? Tonight we're peeling back the layers of this legendary feud, uncovering the truth and the drama that defined an era. Before we dive into this legendary feud, smash that like button and hit subscribe. We're Retrowaves, and we're on a mission to uncover the truth behind music's biggest rivalries and untold stories. You won't find this anywhere else. The late 1960s. The music scene is a sprawling, chaotic battlefield of sound and style. You have the Beatles, shifting from pop euphoria to psychedelic artistry with a clean-cut, accessible image that made them the darlings of the globe. Their songs were often intricate, experimental, and deeply philosophical, but they were also radio-friendly and adored by the masses. Then you have the Rolling Stones, with their raw, blues rock grit, their swagger, and a reputation for rebellion and danger that set them apart. They were the streetwise alternative, the band your parents warned you about. The public had to choose a side. Were you a Beatle fan or a Stones fan? This wasn't just about music, it was about your identity, your worldview. But then came the Bee Gees, Barry, Robin, and Maurice Gibb. They arrived with a sound that seemed to blend the best of both worlds, pop hooks with rock-tinged arrangements. Their early hits, like the haunting New York mining disaster 1941, with its dramatic acoustic build and the soulful To Love Somebody, were undeniable masterpieces of songwriting. They were a pop sensation with a sound that seemed familiar. The intricate three-part harmonies, the lyrical depth that felt both melancholic and grand, the undeniable influence of the Fab Four was stamped all over their early work. Critics started to whisper, was this genuine artistry or a clever imitation? Was their rise to fame built on their own unique genius, or was it simply a well-timed echo of the world's most famous band? The stakes were high. For a band to be called a copycat in the cutthroat music industry was a death sentence. It meant you were second-rate, unoriginal, and destined to be forgotten. And for a band to be called a fake Beatles by one of the true rock gods, that was a label that could haunt you forever, a brand of illegitimacy you could never escape. So, who started the whispers? And why did the Bee Gees never fully shake off the label, even after all their record-breaking success? The Bee Gees' early success was staggering. From their first major UK hit with Massachusetts, to their string of American successes with songs like Holiday and I Started a Joke, they were on a trajectory that few bands ever achieve. They were young, handsome, and incredibly prolific songwriters, often compared to the legendary partnership of Lennon and McCartney. Their harmonies were immaculate, their melodies soaring, and their lyrics were filled with a poetic melancholy that resonated deeply with a generation in flux. But as their fame grew, so did the comparisons, and they grew more hostile. Music critics, journalists, and even other musicians couldn't help but notice the parallels. They're a group of singers who do exactly what the Beatles do, one writer penned. A second-hand Lennon and McCartney. The narrative was set, a trap from which there seemed to be no escape. But these were just words on a page. The real drama, the real tension, was brewing backstage, in the private circles of rock royalty. The rock and roll elite looked on, some with admiration, others with a mix of suspicion and contempt. The Bee Gees were not part of the same rebellious, gritty scene as the Stones. They wore matching suits, their hair was impeccably styled, and they sang about love and loss in a way that felt more theatrical than visceral. They were an enigma. Their polished image stood in stark contrast to the raw, untamed energy of the true rock icons. Were they truly a part of the rock scene, or were they just a shiny, pop-flavored footnote, a fleeting echo of a greater sound? Was their artistic integrity compromised by their pursuit of commercial success? The question was about to get a very public and very controversial answer. While a direct quote from Mick Jagger calling the Bee Gees the fake Beatles is not a confirmed historical fact, the tension between the two bands was very real and went to the heart of what rock and roll was supposed to be. In 1969, the Rolling Stones were in their grittiest, most rebellious era, solidified by albums like Beggar's Banquet and Let It Bleed. They were anti-establishment, the sound of counterculture and rebellion, raw and unfiltered. The Bee Gees, by comparison, were a polished, pop-friendly product. A key piece of verifiable evidence comes not from Jagger, but from his legendary bandmate, Keith Richards. In a 1969 interview with Rolling Stone magazine, a publication that often served as the unofficial Bible of the rock world, Richards was asked about the Bee Gees. His response was chilling in its dismissive tone. He scoffed at their sound and their style, saying they were in their own little fantasy world. He spoke of their clean-cut image and their talk of suits as all kid stuff, isn't it? This wasn't a direct attack on their talent, but it was a clear dismissal of their authenticity, of their place in the rock pantheon. To Richards, rock was about grit, truth, and rebellion. The Bee Gees' polished pop seemed to him to be an act, a sanitized and inauthentic performance. It cast a long, dark shadow, suggesting that the Bee Gees, with their polished harmonies and structured songs, were somehow less legitimate, less real than the raw, blues-infused Rolling Stones. This comment from one of rock's most respected figures cemented the narrative for years to come. But the story was just getting started. The Bee Gees were acutely aware of the comparisons and the whispers. Their early manager, Robert Stigwood, had an ambitious, and some would say reckless plan. He wanted to make them bigger than the Beatles. He pushed them relentlessly, booking them on grueling world tours and demanding a constant stream of hit songs. But that ambition came with a price. It put a massive target on their backs, creating an impossible standard they could never truly meet. The Gibb brothers, particularly Robin, became emotionally fragile under the pressure. The public and the critics were not just comparing their music, they were comparing their lives, their auras, their very essence to the Fab Four. It was a no-win situation. If they sounded too much like the Beatles, they were copycats. If they didn't, they risked losing the very audience that had embraced them. The internal tension mounted. Brothers began to argue, and their creative relationship frayed. The pressure to live up to the hype created deep divisions. Robin even left the group for a short time in 1969, a shocking event that sent shockwaves through the music world. Was this creative friction, or was it the unbearable pressure of living up to an impossible legacy? The drama of their early career was a direct result of this brutal comparison. They were not just a band, they were a three-headed mirror reflecting the impossible shadow of the Beatles. But this was just a prologue to the real battle to come. The story of the fake Beatles rumor is a story of two different kinds of rock stars, two fundamentally opposing visions of what music could be. Mick Jagger was the embodiment of raw, rebellious energy. He was the frontman who strutted, snarled, and lived on the edge. His stage presence was a physical, almost confrontational act, a primal expression of blues and rock and roll. He was the counterculture's chosen son, a symbol of freedom and defiance. The Bee Gees, particularly Robin Gibb, were a different breed entirely. Their stage presence was more about stillness and emotional depth, about the beauty of their harmonies and the power of their lyrics. They were not of the same mold, and in the music world of the late 60s, that difference was a chasm. It's a commonly circulated rumor that Jagger himself used the fake Beatles phrase in private conversations, a sentiment that likely reflected the broader feeling among the rock establishment. While this is not officially confirmed, it is a widely reported part of music lore. It's a perfect rumor, because it so perfectly captures the central tension of the era: authenticity versus polish, rebellion versus melody. Rock was considered the real music, the genre of artists who bled for their art, while pop was often dismissed as commercially driven fluff. Jagger, the ultimate rock deity, would be the perfect person to embody this viewpoint. The whispered label became an unspoken challenge. The Bee Gees were about to face their greatest challenge, a challenge that would force them to either fade away or completely reinvent themselves. The early 1970s proved to be the dark night of the soul for the Bee Gees. The momentum from their 60s hits slowed to a crawl. The internal turmoil, the heavy touring, and the constant comparisons took a devastating toll. They released a string of albums: 2 Years On, Trafalgar, To Whom It May Concern, and Life in a Tin Can, that, while containing some gems, were commercially and critically disappointing. The fake Beatles narrative seemed to have a grain of truth. Were they just a fleeting moment in pop history, a lesser echo of a greater sound? It looked that way. The public moved on to new sounds and new artists. The singer-songwriter movement, hard rock and glam rock, were taking over. The Bee Gees, with their classic sound, seemed entirely out of place. They were a band with no clear direction, an identity crisis wrapped in 3 matching outfits. They were not rock enough for the critics, not pop enough for the fickle masses. It seemed the Bee Gees might fade away entirely, relegated to the history books as a promising band that couldn't quite escape the Beatles' shadow. They were at a crossroads, financially struggling, creatively adrift, and a hair's breadth from total obscurity. But something was about to change. A seismic shift in the music landscape was on the horizon, one that would redefine the Bee Gees and, in doing so, finally shatter the fake Beatles narrative. The truth was, the Bee Gees had a secret weapon that the Beatles never had. A secret weapon that would change everything. That secret weapon was an unparalleled ability for reinvention. At the urging of their record label, the brothers moved to Miami in the mid-1970s and began working with renowned producer Arif Mardin. Mardin pushed them to embrace the emerging R&B and dance music sounds he heard all over the city. The brothers, initially hesitant, leaned into the experiment. The polished pop of the 60s was gone, replaced by a smooth, high-energy rhythm, and most famously, the soaring falsetto of Barry Gibb. The creative breakthrough came during the recording of the song Jive Talkin'. The famous opening rhythm came from the sound of their car driving over a bridge, a sound they meticulously recreated in the studio. It was a moment of pure inspiration, and the resulting song was a smash hit that proved they had found their new sound. This was a deliberate departure. The album Main Course cemented their new identity, but it was the soundtrack to a small film called Saturday Night Fever that would turn them from comeback artists into a global phenomenon. The album wasn't just a collection of songs, it was a cultural document, a sonic representation of a new era. It catapulted them back to the top of the charts and into the stratosphere of global fame. They were no longer the Bee Gees of New York mining disaster 1941. They were a new, unstoppable force. But what did this mean for the old rivalry? Did the fake Beatles label finally die? The climax of this story is not a confrontation between two men, but a confrontation between two eras of music. The fake Beatles label was tied to the 1960s, an era of rock purity and band authenticity. But the late 70s was the era of the superstar. The Bee Gees, with Saturday Night Fever, didn't just have a hit album, they had a cultural phenomenon that transcended music. The album sold an astonishing 15 million copies in the US alone, making it the best-selling album of all time at that point. It went on to sell over 40 million worldwide, a number that still makes it one of the top-selling albums in history. At one point, the Bee Gees were responsible for a staggering 2/3 of the music on the Billboard Hot 100 chart. They were no longer trying to be the Beatles, they were something entirely new, entirely their own. The Bee Gees' sound and their place in history was finally divorced from that of the Beatles. They were a global phenomenon in their own right. And Mick Jagger and the Rolling Stones, they were still rock gods, but they were now part of the establishment, not the rebels. They couldn't ignore the Bee Gees' omnipresence, an ironic twist for a band that had once dismissed them. The ultimate confrontation was in the public eye. The Bee Gees had outsold both the Beatles and the Rolling Stones in a single year. The sheer magnitude of their success was the definitive answer to every whisper, every insult, and every critic whoever called them a copycat. The fake Beatles were now, undeniably, real. But there was a bitter twist. The disco era, while wildly successful, was also controversial. As the 1980s dawned, there was a public backlash against disco, fueled by rock purists and a changing cultural landscape. This was symbolized by events like the Disco Demolition Night in Chicago, where thousands gathered to burn disco records in a stadium. This era, which had been the Bee Gees' saving grace, now became a new source of ridicule. They had escaped one comparison, only to be vilified for a different reason, a painful testament to the fleeting nature of fame and the harsh judgment of the music world. Was this truly a victory, or just a new battle in the same old war? The Bee Gees' transformation from 60s pop darlings to 70s disco kings was the ultimate act of defiance against the fake Beatles label. They didn't just evolve, they were reborn. They proved they were more than an imitation. They were adaptable, innovative songwriters capable of transcending genres and eras. The rumor of Mick Jagger calling them the fake Beatles remains unverified, a piece of musical lore that captures the tension of the time. However, the comments from Keith Richards are confirmed and provide a clear window into the rock establishment's view of the Gibb brothers' early career. The Bee Gees didn't have to fight a direct battle with the Rolling Stones. Their success was the silent, definitive answer. The fake Beatles narrative was a burden of their early career, a challenge they had to overcome, and they did so not by winning an argument, but by changing the rules of the game entirely. They transcended the rock versus pop debate by creating a genre of their own, and perhaps, just maybe, that was the only way to truly win. Their story is a powerful reminder that authenticity isn't about fitting a specific mold, but about being true to your artistic voice, even if it means changing completely. What do you think? Was the fake Beatles label a fair criticism of their early work, or a completely unfair jab from the rock establishment? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want to uncover more stories like this, where the truth behind music's biggest legends is more complex than the headlines, make sure you're subscribed to Retro Waves. Next time, we're diving into the real reason behind the iconic breakup of a legendary duo. You won't want to miss it.